Hello, future Budget Blocks team. My name is Chris, and I'm here with Adrian. We are the current DS team for Budget Blocks. If you're watching this, we're probably assuming that you're the web team and that there isn't a future DS team on this project. If that's not the case, DS team, just review our code, reach out to us if you have any questions. Same for the web team. If you have any problems, please contact us. If you want to see how we did what we did and kind of our thought process, check out our release canvases on Notion. Should still have access to them. But this is our README page. It goes into pretty detailed text explanations of all of our endpoints, all of our post request endpoints. So with example GIFs, so you should be able to, if you don't want to watch this whole video, you can check this out and see how to use our API. Now we can head over to the docs page and I'll explain all of our endpoints. Let's see, so the main endpoint is the transaction endpoint. It automatically categorizes Plaid transactions into budget blocks categories using a user's preferences. And if they don't exist, it uses default preferences. We'll get into users' preferences and default preferences a little bit. But basically, all of our endpoints have an example, a working example preloaded into the request body on this auto-generated docs page. So yeah, Adrian, if you want to execute that. Yeah, so as you can see, it returns essentially the same transactions array that's sent into it, except it converts the original categories into a key called Plaid category, and it adds another key called budget blocks category. It also includes the user ID that was passed into the request, and it totals up all of the categories. It also includes it times the request. Yeah, that's pretty much the transaction request. We made some fake user data so that right here, it's in the .txt file called example budget blocks transactions in our repo. If you copy and paste this into the transaction request, you'll get back a more realistic view of what a user would look like. So these are all the transactions categorized. And at the bottom, you can see totals summed up. We base them off of average expenditure data for New York City, so it lines up with that. As you can see, income is negative. And as you operate within the Plaid API a bit more, you'll notice that negative amounts just means that that amount was added to the account as opposed to taken out from the account. Yeah, so that's pretty much that. And we can move on to the census endpoint. The default data is Seagirt, New Jersey, kind of my hometown. And the idea is that, so you need to put in city, then state. State doesn't need to be abbreviated as far as I know, but it doesn't work with zip code. And if you hit execute, what it's doing is looking at our database and finds the nearest city that we have data for. It's census average expenditure data from 2017-18. And that specific data is in our release canvases if you want to check it out. But we put all of the census expenditure data into Plaid categories, and we recategorize the census data into budget blocks categories according to the user's preference. So most likely that's the default preferences, and you can see those totals there. It looks fairly realistic. But yeah, we transfer the Plaid categories into the budget blocks categories just like we do for the transaction request. Something to point out that this is the same way in the transaction and census request. Savings has a few categories that correspond to it from Plaid. But it also adds whatever the difference is between income and all the rest of the spending. So anything that's left over is also added to savings. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much the census endpoint. And we can talk about update user. So we've been talking about how a user can customize their categorization preferences, and that's what the update user endpoint is for. The idea being that if on the front end a user sees a transaction categorized a way that they don't like, they could click on that transaction and say recategorize and pick a new category for it to go into. So ideally, the front end would send the plaid categories that transaction originally corresponded, the old budget blocks category, and the new destination category, budget blocks category, with the user ID. So now in the future, when you do transaction and census requests, if there is a transaction that falls under these plaid categories, it'll be categorized into the new budget block category for this user, as opposed to the old one. This also allows, if the new budget blocks category is not a category that the user currently has, it will create that category. So we can hit execute and see what that looks like. It just returns an updated preference successfully message. And you can see in the users table, changed third-party betterment from savings to transfer. And you shouldn't have to be interacting directly with the database or its tables too much through something like Table Plus. We'll get to that a little bit later. Okay, yeah, and is custom, that column basically corresponds to whether or not a user has customized their categorization preferences or not. That's important because if they have customized their preferences and we update the default preferences, they won't get the updated defaults. They'll just keep their custom preference. That doesn't make sense. Maybe we'll touch on it more when we go over the admin panel. But yeah, that's the update users request. Yeah, we have reset user and delete user. Those should be pretty self-explanatory. They both only accept a user ID. Reset user resets a user's categorization preferences back to the defaults, current defaults. Delete user deletes the user from the database. Yeah, so those are all of our post request endpoints. As you see, we have a bunch of admin endpoints, and you shouldn't really have to interact with them directly. What we can show you, we have a login based admin page. When you go to the site for the first time, or this URL for the first time, it's just the api.budgetblocks.org/admin. It'll prompt you with a login window. The username and password are both test. If you really want to, we can update that at some point. But so let's check it out. You have several different options here. You can edit the master DB. What that does is it changes the default categorization preferences. So you can select a budget blocks category, like personal, and then you can look at all the plaid categories that correspond to that budget blocks category in this dropdown. Select one of those, and you can pick a new budget blocks category for that plaid category to correspond to. Submit, and now you have a change log of what changes have been made, time it was made, your default categorization preferences are updated. So kind of to touch back on that is custom thing, if a user had customized their preferences, they wouldn't get that change of nightlife and karaoke moving from personal to debt. But if they were using the default preferences, their preferences would be updated to the new defaults. So looking at the admin panel, you can now go back to the main window or view the current status of the database like this. It's not the cleanest UI, but you can see what plaid categories correspond to what budget blocks categories. personal, all the budget blocks categories are in bold, and all of the plaid categories are in lists underneath it. Yeah, there's a lot of plaid categories. So now going back to the main admin panel, we can see some of the other functionality. You can reset the master database. That will undo all of the changes you've made and reset the default categorization preferences back to our original values. Then from there, you can view the database if you want, or go back to admin. You can directly display the current master database from the main admin panel. And you can also reset the user database that removes all of the user's custom preferences and sets it back. Which basically recreates the users table, I believe. So now there's no users in the database. Okay, so back to, you can also view the full change log. Right now, since we reset the master table, there's no changes. But if you edit the master table, the changes. I think that's pretty much everything. Yeah, you can see the change log, the recent changes that show up, and then that shows up in the log. I think that's pretty much everything. Let us know if you have any questions. Yeah, you can always contact us on LinkedIn or Slack. Good luck on building up budget blocks even further. It's a really exciting project.